How to deal with the dealers of Marseille. Eighth visit in as many years as Emmanuel Macron's been president to the Mediterranean port city. This 1 month after the assassination of the brother of an anti-gangland activist shocked all of France. Macron there for an update on the government's €5 billion plan to win back the streets and offer hope to fed-up citizens of the country's second largest city. The whole reason Amine Kessaci became an activist was the earlier murder of his older brother, who got mixed up with the wrong crowd. The unsolved murder of 20-year-old Mehdi Kessaci, who was training to become a police officer, bears the hallmarks of a calling card from the narcos. Now, the lure of Marseille as a hub for traffickers extends back centuries, long before the 1970s, when Hollywood glamorized the heroine smugglers of the French Connection. To be fair, it's just one of many European ports of entry for cannabis and cocaine. Cocaine expected to further flood the market here in Europe now that it's riskier to ship to a United States that's blowing up suspected smuggler boats. Cocaine that's cheaper and increasingly in demand. And there lies an essential question. Is the onus on cartels or consumers? We'll ask what today's supply and demand of narcotics say about us and our societies. Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about the battle for Marseille. And with us from the Mediterranean port city, reporter Richard Asheton. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Francois.
He often shuttles between Marseille and Birmingham, where he's senior lecturer in politics and international relations, Aston University. Joseph Downing joining us in between from London. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.
Sociologist Marie-Geoffrey Roustide is with the National Institute of Health and Medical Research, INSERM. You're also a member of the Scientific Committee of the European Union Drugs Agency, which compiles statistics on trends on consumption. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
And Federico Varese, professor of sociology at Sciences Po's Paris Center for European Studies and Comparative Politics. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
On the go, you can always listen to the show, wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, a meeting with young people, a visit to a police station, a prison, to the main train station where the government's funding an extension. That's just part of what filled Emmanuel Macron's busy schedule this Tuesday. But it's without the press that the French president chose to visit. These are live images you're seeing, by the way. That the French president earlier chose to visit the gravesite of Mehdi Kessaci, last month's murder, still fresh in everyone's mind. His older brother of 2 years telling RTL Radio on Monday how he feels guilt over what definitely looks like a targeted assassination.
Of course I didn't pull the trigger. Of course, if I could have given my life and made sure I was there that day on that roundabout to take those bullets and save my little brother who'd done nothing wrong, I'd have done it without hesitation. Obviously. The investigation will tell. I warned my little brother. I told him to be careful, that people with bad intentions were looking for me. And when I told him that, he said we didn't look alike because he was thinner than me. So today, did they mistake me for someone else? Was it to send me a message? I don't think that this is sending a message anymore. When you take someone's life, it's not sending a message. It's not a warning crime. It's a barbaric one.
Marie-Geoffrey Roustide, you're from Marseille. The whole nation's been moved by this story. What are your thoughts 1 month after, what with the crime unsolved?
It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the Kessaci family. And unfortunately, we also have hundreds of people who have been also murdered by drug traffickers these last years. And it happens in Marseille, but it also happens in other French cities, in large French cities like Marseille, but also more and more in smaller cities. So I think that now the state needs to also intervene and to have also social policies and not only a repressive approach to tackle this question.
Richard Asheton, has something changed since the murder of Amine Kessaci's little brother?
Well, it was interesting. This afternoon, one of President Macron's appointments opening a new police station in the northern quarters of Marseille, where the drug gangs are headquarters, there were more journalists than members of the public. People here are disillusioned, to put it mildly, with how the president has gone about dealing with the issue. He's, as you mentioned in your introduction, visited Marseille lots of times, promised a lot, and the violence carries on. Has something changed in terms of the government's approach?
In terms of the citizens, I was going to say.
I think people are desperate for something to bring an end to this, but they have been for a long time. As Marie said, this has been going on for several years. 2 years ago, there were a record number of murders in Marseille, 49 killings. And Benoît Payan, the mayor of Marseille, has been stressing today that number has decreased now. So now we're on about 10 murders for this year, and there were about 20 last year. So in that sense, some progress has been made. But one mother of a victim, a prominent victim who was killed a couple of years ago, managed to meet Macron today and said to him, look, this has to end. That's, I think, how people feel in Marseille today.
Yeah, the number of homicides has decreased, but there are still points that are dangerous, not just in the northern neighborhoods, which are the poorest, not so far from the picturesque old port of which is a tourist favorite. There's Saint-Mauron neighborhood. This is Marseille's 3rd arrondissement, near the sea, where the 1,000 employees of the Office of Mobile Phone and Internet provider Orange were told at the end of last month to work from home. They only reopened the office on Monday under tightened security. Workers discussing the shadow of what's called the DZ Mafia, preferring not to give their names when speaking to the French news agency AFP.
There were riots. I couldn't tell you how many young people there were. They were masked and carrying Kalashnikovs between midday and 2 p.m. Apparently, a new dealing spot had sprung up, and from what we were told, the DZ Mafia wanted to take it over. So it was between young people, between rival groups. We were there at the time, so we were confined inside. We were told, don't go out or don't go near the windows. And if there's shooting, get under your desks. You can't work in an atmosphere like that. It's just not possible.
Joseph Downing, a lot to unpack there. Kalashnikovs between the hours of 12 and 2 p.m.?
Yeah, I mean, this is extremely routine in Marseille for these gangs to use heavy military grade assault rifles. Europe, more generally, has got a serious problem with small arms trafficking coming from the Balkans through Serbian and Albanian gangs. And these are the arms that enforce violence in the drugs trade in Naples, in Palermo, as well as in Marseille and beyond. I mean, and this kind of sort of daily struggle of violence and dealing across the streets of Marseille is very common. I mean, in the city centre neighbourhood of Belizance, you can see people dealing crack at lunchtime, well into the night. I was in the northern quarters of Marseille near Le Castellan, the famous estate where Zinedine Zidane was born. And there are still graffitied signs on a wall pointing to an open-air drugs market that will give you the prices of drugs and the name of the retail drugs point that you can then look up on social media to see what they've got and what special offers they have that day. And I mean, this is the problem. One thing I like about Emmanuel Macron's statements on this subject is he's laid at least part of the blame on the consumers of drugs. And France especially has a very high, one of the highest in Europe, per capita cannabis consumption rates. And when you're talking about money at this level in the sort of hundreds of millions of euros, unfortunately, I'm quite pessimistic. I don't think that this is something that the state can stop. And if they do clamp down on this activity in certain parts of Marseille, it won't stop. It will just move elsewhere. And I think that's a really serious concern, picking up on what Marie said earlier, when we see increased levels of violence carried out across actually smaller French cities, right? It's something similar to what we have in the UK, the sort of county lines issue, where drug gangs from places like Marseille seek new markets in smaller towns and cities across France that don't have such a sophisticated retail drug infrastructure. So I do think if this is something, and I don't actually think it is something that can be contained in Marseille even, but if this was something that hypothetically could be contained in Marseille, it will just move somewhere else. And I think that this is a problem that France, the United States, Holland, Belgium, the United Kingdom all face when it comes to living in a liberal society, one that promotes free trade, where there are huge numbers of drug consumers. It's extremely difficult in terms of an issue to solve, really.
Yeah, so there's the supply chain and there's the consumers. I want to get back to what Emmanuel Macron announced this Tuesday while in Marseille. Just, you know, you touched upon how these syndicates work cross-border and are powerful. We talked about the DZ Mafia. Last week, two employees of Marseille's police magistrates court, they were aged 24 and 26, were arrested on suspicion of going over case files and informing the DZ Mafia. The younger of the pair, whose ex-boyfriend is reportedly close to that group, allegedly receiving money, gifts, and free trips. The older's partners have been tied to drug trafficking as well. So, Federico Varisi, by the way, Amine Kessaci, who you saw in that clip there, he's under police protection. Most of the magistrates are under police protection. You have infiltrators inside the judicial system who are able to feed information on cases to potential suspects. Is, as the justice minister has said, Marseille the new Palermo? Remember the Palermo of the 80s and 90s and 2000s?
Yes, and you have high-profile murders. So there is a degree to which these are not just drugs gang. They obviously are able to infiltrate the police, as you just mentioned, but more generally, they control the community. They offer a degree of community support, believe it or not. They have been reported that they give access to the swimming pool or help with shopping. So for me, the most dangerous aspects of what we are talking about is not just that they traffic and sell drugs, but they become an entity, a governance entity, which goes beyond just a simple crime. So as Marie was saying, it's not just a police problem, it's not just a problem of arresting the drug trafficker, it's a problem of regaining the trust of the community. And of course, the Sicilian problem was very similar. You had communities that did not trust the Italian state and self-governed through the control of criminals. That to me is very important. On the issue of violence, you pointed out that the murder rate is going down in Marseille, but that may be that the gang has won. Usually when there is a war...
Well, there was talk that there was kind of a turf war after COVID.
Exactly. So usually you find the war and the deaths when they fight over territory, over turf. But the moment that the war is won by one gang over the other, well, obviously the murder rate goes down, but the mafia is in charge.
Marie-Geoffrey Roustide, is this something new? What's just been described by Federico, or has this always existed? Criminal syndicates, they had different names, they were different from different areas. For once in a while, there was the Corsicans. Now it's from other places. In this case, DZ is a reference to Algeria. But is this anything new in Marseille?
No, it's not new. That's an old problem, but the violence has increased indeed. And I think that what Federico have just pointed is very important. It's also a social problem. And because the French state has forgot all the poor areas, there is a lack this last year of investment in poor areas. And all these drug traffickers, they are using all these failures to create social support and to give the illusion to the population that they can help the population, and the population of all these poor areas that is invested in drug trafficking, they felt abandoned by the French state. So 30 years ago, there were more money in all these poor area, more social events, more money for the school. And we need more investment in social policy. And if we don't have this investment or in social policy, all the drug traffickers...
What about this €5 billion plan? Marseille en grand, I guess you could say bigger, better Marseille, whatever. I don't know how you would translate that in English. The government's putting money in.
Yeah, but until now, they put a lot of money on repression because all this repression policy cost a lot of money, and other countries like Portugal, for example, has decided to put less money in repression and more money for social policy, drug treatment, prevention. Because if we have people who use drugs, that's also because we have not enough prevention in France. So if we want to make the market decrease, we need to help young people not to become drug users. And to do that, we need to have more investment in prevention. That's not only a repression or a police problem.
This term, the DZ Mafia, was unknown to most French people until very recently. It's not exactly a top-down crime syndicate like the 'Ndrangheta in Italy, argues France's drug czar. Dimitri Zoulas telling Le Figaro newspaper that the DZ resembles a French version of the Mokro Mafia, born in the Netherlands. It's above all a branding with an ethnical nod to Algeria, an association of local drug kingpins, and their ambitions to control turfs, principally through an exacerbated use of violence. Is that how you see it, Joseph Downing, that the DZ Mafia is more a brand than an organization?
Yep. I mean, until recently, they were at war with the Yoda clan, Yoda being a reference to the small green character in Star Wars. And branding is something that these groups are very good at. And this is something that my research has picked up on through their slick use of social media. The DZ Mafia, for example, have released videos of them returning to poor rural areas of Algeria and giving out material goods to poor residents, right? In a nod to the tactics of the Mexican cartels in poor parts of Mexico. So branding is something they're actually very good at, right? I would hesitantly agree that they're perhaps not your traditional, highly organized, hierarchical sort of Italian crime families, but these guys are very sophisticated. I think we should be very careful in looking at them as amateurs. When I interviewed the prosecutor of Marseille a couple of years ago, she was very quick to tell me how complex these individuals' money laundering apparatus is, and that they're very good at making a huge amount of money in France and moving it to more opaque jurisdictions such as the United Arab Emirates, where some of their key figures have been in hiding and have ordered sort of hits and violence on the streets of Marseille. So yeah, they don't fit exactly our traditional understanding of a sort of Godfather mafia clan, but they are also very sophisticated. And the uphill battle that the French state has got really is against the financial flows, right? So they're very good at branding. It's a very cool thing in Marseille amongst certain communities of young people to be involved in the drug trade, as it is in the UK, as it is in the US. But behind all that is this significant flow of money in a city where there are very few economic options for these young individuals. In many of these estates, which are barricaded and the access to them is controlled by these drug groups, it's a kind of option between an insecure, precarious, low-paid job and perhaps not that much better paid, but definitely much more kind of glamorous work with drug cartels, with a clear route to kind of progress, perhaps, right, around these individuals that own big cars and homes in Dubai. And I think it's that economic issue, and the economic issues, as you picked up on, Marseille, the third district, the Belle de Mai, is apparently one of the poorest, if not the poorest in Europe. It's the uphill economic battle in Marseille that really is the problem here. In that, much has been done in Marseille since the capital of culture in 2013, but most of it has benefited individuals like myself, highly mobile, professional individuals that have money to consume, your recent arrivals from Paris. Whereas many of these communities in Marseille, and Amine Kessaci said this to me when I saw him in the summer, many of them feel left behind by the changes recently that have taken place in Marseille, as Marseille has become cool, desirable, and a place that, Time Out has voted in recent years as one of the coolest cities in the world. It leaves these individuals behind and further reinforces these economic divisions within the city that the French state has been unable to conquer, really.
Yeah, definitely two tracks in Marseille. You mentioned Dubai, and a lot has been made of the fact that some of these drug dealers even post on social media from abroad. It was something that was posed to Emmanuel Macron earlier in the day.
The Minister of Justice and the National Director of the Judicial Police have made several diplomatic visits, as will I in the coming days, to seek cooperation from the countries where the network leaders are based, so that we can seize their assets and arrest the leaders. That's the key to all of this.
Richard Asherton, there is right now a trial taking place in the northern French city of Lille for a drug dealer alleged drug dealer who was extradited from the UAE. Those remarks by Emmanuel Macron, how did they sit with their audience?
Well, lots of people came to listen to them, so I think that says one thing. I think, as we've seen in Australia, obviously last week, imposing a ban on social media for people for those under 16. This is a hot topic all over the world. Social media. People want, parents particularly want an answer. They want to feel that their children are safe, which is currently not the case. And this has particular pertinence when it comes to the issue of drug trafficking in France, because some of the foot soldiers, the people enlisted to do the dirty work of the gangs, are so young, some of them as young as 14. There was a horrendous case last year in October when a 15-year-old was recruited online by one of the DZ Mafia leaders from prison. They managed to get mobile phones into the prisons using drones. The 15-year-old was recruited to go and make a hit on a rival gang in Marseille. He went to the estate of the rival gang, was discovered by residents of that estate, searched, found to have a weapon on him, and stabbed about 50 times and killed and then burnt. Not only that, after that, the leader of DZ Mafia from prison recruited another boy to go and finish the job. This boy was only 14. This is all alleged, by the way. And in this case, he offered him 50,000. He's reported to have offered him 50,000 euros to go and complete this job. The 14-year-old booked a ride share, booked a taxi to go around to this rival estate. The taxi driver refused to stop at the appointed destination. And the 14-year-old ended up shooting dead the taxi driver. So much to unpack there, horrendous story, but just one example of the extent of the violence and the extent of the amount of money involved in it, and also the fact that this is all happening online. These kids look at their phones and they see these alerts, adverts, if you like, to go and do a job that will earn them, in some cases, huge amounts of money. So I think there isn't really anyone who would say it's not a good idea to try and find some way to prevent those the drug gang leaders from recruiting vulnerable kids. How that is done remains to be seen. There are suggestions Macron may consider trying to copy Australia's law. It's so difficult to do, as we know.
So orders, Federico Varese, this is where I guess the comparisons stop with the 1980s or the 1990s. Orders given from abroad or from prison, recruitment drives over social media, money that flows halfway around the globe at the press of a button. Times have changed.
Well, yes and no, because I think there are two dimensions to the problem that we are discussing. There is the international drug trafficking, and of course, if you traffic internationally, you have to move from Colombia to Dubai, you are on the phone, and you are in a sense an international business person. And then there is the local dimension, where the war and the fighting and the murders is, and it's a local fight over territory. So in some sense, we have to separate the two dimensions if we want to get to the problem. Going back to the earlier point, and also how to solve the problem, how vulnerable people can be prevented, I'm not sure we should blame the internet simply. As we just said, there are vulnerable people who find no ways to thrive in society, and so Macron should visit a school as well as a police station, because that's where you reduce the vulnerability of people who are then recruited online. But first comes the vulnerability that is a product of the absence of opportunities to do something else with your life, as opposed to be recruited to kill somebody for 50,000.
Marie-Geoffrey Rousti.
I totally agree with Federico. I have two colleagues, two sociologists, Claire Duport and Khadija Sahraoui, who worked in Marseille, and they made a lot of interviews with young people involved in drug trafficking. And the question of vulnerability is very important. And all these young boys said that if they had the opportunity to become journalists, researchers, teachers, they would prefer to do these jobs. So that's why that would have been very important for Macron also to visit school, to discuss with all these young people. That's not really a choice for them. They are vulnerable and they are attracted by drug traffickers because they are vulnerable. And if you gave them a good level of school education, they will have opportunities as our children have. And I think that it's a large part of the solution. So we need to have a long-term perspective and to invest money also in education, social activities, and not to abandon all these vulnerable population.
Education and also prevention and awareness.
Prevention.
Not just in the northern neighborhoods of Marseille, but across the country.
Yeah.
Statistics across Europe point to an increasing demand for illicit drugs, particularly cocaine, with a near doubling of first-time users in the past decade here in France. Cocaine, often these days associated with the stimulant ketamine, the mix nicknamed Calvin Klein for its initials after the fashion brand. There you see the statistics. It's dangerous as reported here by the Scottish edition of The Sun. Joseph Downing, you pointed to one measure announced by Emmanuel Macron, a near doubling of fines to 600 euros for possession of illicit drugs. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's an interesting policy, and one that will grab headlines, and one that will probably make voters that don't really know much about drugs, the possession of drugs, and the police in France sit up and take note, and perhaps think the president is doing something important. But we have to think here also about the structural problem of the French police force and the French police unions. Fines on drug possession are only as useful as their enforcement. And one of the problems that Macron has faced, and one of the real issues with drug law enforcement and the fight against drug gangs in Marseille, as well as the police and institutional corruption that you highlighted earlier, has also been in the reluctance of the police to get involved. And one of the issues that France faces when it comes to its police force is it's highly unionized and somewhat reluctant sometimes to get stuck into the battle against drugs, as well as, on the other side of the coin, being under-resourced and understaffed. So I don't think that consumers of cocaine on the streets of French cities are going to be particularly concerned about the doubling of a fine, when it's highly unlikely that they're going to be stopped and searched, especially if they are wealthy, well-dressed, white, of ethnic origin. They're extremely unlikely to be stopped and searched by the police. So I don't think this is really going to make really a huge difference. But it does hint at something which is really key here, which is the consumption side of this equation. We spend a lot of time talking about the supply side because that's where often the violence occurs. But the supply side only exists to supply the demand. And this is where a real serious issue lies in that, many countries have experimented with the US, for example, in many states now as legal cannabis for recreational use. But if we're seeing an increase in the use of drugs like ketamine and cocaine, I mean, that we're not even at a point of legalizing cannabis in France, let alone thinking about or even discussing legalizing cocaine and ketamine. But even in cases where certain drugs are legalized, drug groups or criminal groups like this are extremely agile and able to move into other markets of other kinds of crimes, other kinds of drugs which are not legalized or decriminalized because there's a demand, but there's also, as Marie highlighted, this pool of vulnerable young individuals who have really little choice other than to go in the streets to feed their families. France is quite a paradox because on paper, the French welfare state is extremely generous to families, and is perhaps one of the most generous in Europe. Yet, from speaking to other researchers that have done a lot of work on this subject on the ground, many families in these estates or in the city centre areas like Belzance or the Belle de Mai seem to somehow fall between the gaps and end up without access to these generous welfare state handouts, which forces many of these young, particularly men, out into the streets at quite a young age to just literally put food on the table. So, France is quite a paradox in this regard.
So, Marie-Geoffrey Roustid, can you break it down for us? We fell down a rabbit hole this morning looking at the trends and the statistics. We saw some good news in that younger people seem to be taking less addictive, less tobacco, less alcohol, less cannabis. But what is it with cocaine and with ketamine? Why are these so popular these days?
So one of the hypotheses is that cannabis has decreased because we were very good for making a decrease for tobacco. And as in France, cannabis is used by smoking. And
they mix it with tobacco.
Yes, they mix with tobacco. As we have a quite good policy for decreasing tobacco, it also had an impact on cannabis. But unfortunately, we have also bad news because cocaine is increasing a lot. If we look at the 90s, for example, the level of cocaine use in general population is now 10 times higher compared to the 90s. So,
why are people attracted to cocaine and ketamine?
People are attracted because for different reasons. Because we are in a society that valorized the performance, and a lot of people use cocaine for work because they have very bad working conditions and they want to keep their job and they need to work more and more, so they use some stimulants for that. You have also people who use cocaine in the sexual area, also because they are losing confidence and they want to be more performant. And you have also young people who use cocaine because they are not very they have difficulties for connecting to others, and they thought that cocaine may help them. But unfortunately, cocaine has a lot of bad consequences for the health of people, and that's why I think that it's very important to invest money in prevention, but also in drug treatment. But for the young people, we need also to be more specific because it has decreased among a specific group, the group of people who are 16 years old. But when we look at the group of people between 18 years old and 24, it increased a lot. And
it's across all social categories?
All social categories, because the cocaine, the price of cocaine has decreased a lot. So now all social classes are using cocaine. And there is also another that will be my last point. But cannabis use, for example, is also increasing among older people, people who are more than 55, for example, because cannabis is also used for therapeutic reasons.
Federico Verisi.
No, I just wanted to add very briefly that there is a massive increase in production. So Colombia has increased production on 1 year on the next by 53%, and 10% more of the areas of Colombia is now producing cocaine. So you have a massive increase in production in Colombia. Prices, as Marie was saying, is going down. If a cargo is intercepted by the police, the deals between the traffickers, the Colombians and, say, the Italians or the French, is that they just send another one because it's so cheap and there is so much of it. So one of the reasons why consumption goes up is because there is so much supply around the world.
And this blowing boats out of the water in the Caribbean by the United States, is there going to be a knock-on effect for Europe the way there is with cheap Chinese imports coming our way because of tariffs from the US?
Well, first of all, 90 people have been killed so far in a totally extra-legal, illegal way by the United States. It's appalling. We don't know if these people really
will it deviate more of the cocaine towards Europe?
I think that's one thesis. It's an argument that I think is possible because I think generally it's harder to export to the United States. And so more of it will be exported to Europe. Yeah, you have a kind of a balloon effect in which more of it will come our way. I wanted to also say that we did a large study of gangs in London, and we found that 4.7% of the population of London lives under the control of gangs.
4.7?
Of the total population.
Wow.
So it's almost 500,000 people.
That's a lot of people.
And we do a sociological study, and we find that distance from social services is the variable that best explains the rise of gangs that control communities, as opposed to just being involved in crime. So I think it goes back to, the general point we are making here, that there is a lack of social support that fuels gangs, not just in Marseille or in Paris, but also in England.
Yeah, and on that point, Richard Asheton, Marseille, again, we've been talking about how it's just one of many hubs for illicit drugs. They regularly wash up, to pick up on what Federico said about how cheap the merchandise has become in mystery bundles on the beaches of both sides of the English Channel and North Sea. There have also been big busts everywhere from Portugal and Spain to Antwerp, the Netherlands, even Sweden, not to mention, northern French cities like the port of Le Havre, Dunkirk. So people in Marseille, do they feel, I know this is a regular grievance, like they're getting a bum rap compared to the rest of the country?
I'm glad you asked. I think they do in some ways, and I think it's fascinating for centuries, Marseille has been a byword for crime and degradation and insurrection. All of those things have gone on and existed in Marseille, and Marseille still is a byword for this drug problem, a symbol of it, if you like. But and it's more obvious, it's more present. I think we shouldn't pretend that it's not a huge problem in Marseille. You see tags of the drug gangs all over the city centre. There are bullet holes of previous shootings. Interestingly, the mayor of Marseille today suggesting that pop stars, rappers from Marseille, people like Jules, who are some of the biggest celebrities in France, they need to do their bit to speak out about this issue. But yeah, absolutely. Everything I think we're talking about here is not necessarily solely a Marseille problem. Le Havre in the north of France, for example, is perhaps the most significant port of entry of drugs into France rather than Marseille. So yeah, perhaps it's time to widen our discussion. Maybe that's for next time.
Marie-Geoffrey Roustide, the homicide rate related to drugs is higher in the Paris area than it is in your hometown. And yet here we are instead discussing Marseille.
And it's also the case in the Netherlands or in Belgium, where there are also a lot of murders. And we are focusing on Marseille because Marseille is also a vibrant city marked with social inequalities. Marseille, there are also a lot of films on Marseille. And I think that there is also, that's a city that is attracting a lot. And that's why we talk about Marseille a lot. But that's also a city marked by a lot of poverty, a lot of social inequality. And I think that we need also to tackle all these problems, to solve or to try to find a beginning of a solution, because solving is probably too ambitious.
Joseph Downing, when you heard there Federico Varese describe those statistics regarding London, where you are right now, do we talk too much about Marseille?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a much broader problem, right? I mean, this is, again, something that's not new to London. I mean, it's got worse, as Federico points out, in terms of, the Conservative government in the last 15 years radically cutting social services and youth provision in London. But London also is a port city that's got this history of crime, and there are some kind of similarities. And I think we need to look around Europe and to really look around much of the industrialized post-industrial world, the inequalities of post-industrial societies where, communities that were pulled into cities like Marseille to be manual workers that then end up unemployed and marginalized because of the closing of heavy industry in the mid to late 20th century creates this kind of inequality that is really important in Marseille being an important context for crime. But we could also talk about this in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in other French cities, the suburbs of Paris. We could talk about this in certain cities in Spain. I mean, one thing that Marseille does have in terms of its proximity to drug supply is the route over the sea from northern Morocco to southern Spain. So actually, a lot of the drugs that end up in Marseille don't come through established port infrastructures like Le Havre, or indeed like the large port in Marseille. They come over in small boats from northern Morocco and then up through Spain into France in high-performance cars. So they themselves operate with and these kinds of informal infrastructures. They've been experimenting recently even with drones to bring drugs over from northern Morocco. So that's one thing that does situate Marseille somewhat in a different context because of its proximity to those informal Mediterranean smuggling routes. We've spoken about the UAE here as an opaque jurisdiction that's very reluctant to tackle financial crime. One of the problems here being, even if there's a diplomatic visit on this issue, little is going to be done, right? The money that can be made from other forms of cooperation with the UAE will always trump drug violence in France, but also the Moroccan government is important to talk about here in terms of its unwillingness to tackle the production and the exportation of cannabis across the Mediterranean. And I think that this is one other thing that distinguishes Marseille because of its proximity to those informal Mediterranean smuggling networks.
All right, the gateway to the Mediterranean for good and for bad. I want to thank you so much, Joseph Downing, for being with us from London, Richard Ashton from Marseille, Federico Varese, Marie-Geoffrey Roustide. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.